My wife was cheating on me. My daughter and I stumbled upon a live stream on the internet where we saw my wife seducing a man unknown to me and cheating on me. Andrea Johnson navigated her Lexus down the Savannah Parkway, her mind wandering from the conversation she had just had with Ethan, a man nearly 10 years her junior. He was charming, passionate, and engaging. But despite all that, her thoughts were elsewhere. As she moved further away from the city, her thoughts drifted to her husband John and their daughter Chloe. John had always been her rock, steady and reliable, and Chloe, at 14, was blossoming into a confident young woman. Even with Ethan's allure, Andrea couldn't help but feel that pull towards her family, a sense of loyalty that, although tested, hadn't quite faded. Savannah's traffic was relentless, a known inconvenience that Andrea had come to expect. The delays, though annoying, gave her a chance to reflect. She smiled at the thought of Chloe's school project, which he had promised to help with, and John's recent home improvement endeavors. The life they had built together was something she cherished, and though the excitement of her affair with Ethan added a certain thrill, it felt hollow compared to the solid foundation she and John had laid over their 15 years of marriage. As she neared home, Andrea couldn't shake a growing sense of guilt. She had been living in two worlds, one of stability and one of fleeting excitement. Her affair with Ethan had begun innocuously enough, but it had quickly escalated into something she couldn't fully control. Despite all the moments of passion and laughter with him, she couldn't deny that it left her feeling incomplete. Ethan, for all his youthful energy, was not John. John, who had supported her through thick and thin, had been nothing but a good husband and father. The thought of losing him scared her, more than she liked to admit. Pulling into the driveway, Andrea noticed immediately that John's truck wasn't parked in its usual spot. The house looked dark and empty, an unsettling contrast to what she had expected. She had hoped that John would be there to welcome her home, maybe with a glass of wine and one of his typical quips about Savannah's brutal traffic. But the absence of his truck stirred something uneasy in her. Where could he be? Her phone buzzed back to life after being off for hours, and Andrea was met with a barrage of notifications. There were missed calls from Chloe, several texts from her sister, and one from her mother. She hadn't realized that she'd left her phone off since dinner. As she scrolled through the messages, her heart sank. They were all asking the same question. Who is Ethan? And why are you with him? Her stomach churned. How did they know? Meanwhile, across town, John sat in his office, a bittersweet smile on his face. He had planned a surprise for Andrea to mark their anniversary, a celebration she likely wouldn't expect. John knew Andrea would be in Savannah for her conference, a semi-annual trip she made for work. This year, however, it coincided with their 15th wedding anniversary, and John had gone to great lengths to make it special. He'd been working on a custom necklace, one that was meant to symbolize their years together, each pearl representing a milestone in their marriage. For weeks, John had been coordinating with Roger Benson, a longtime client and friend. Roger's daughter, Emily, who was a student in Savannah, had agreed to help him deliver the gift at a restaurant where Andrea and her colleagues would be dining. The plan was simple. Roger's daughter would sit nearby, filming Andrea's reaction as a waiter presented her with the necklace. John wanted to capture the moment, hoping to surprise her with a heartfelt gesture in front of her colleagues. But as the evening unfolded, the plan unraveled in ways John hadn't anticipated. Emily had done as asked, filming discreetly as the waiter approached Andrea's table. But what John didn't know, what none of them could have foreseen, was that Andrea was dining with Ethan, not her colleague Karen as expected. As the live stream came through to the big screen in John's living room, where he, Chloe, and the rest of the family had gathered, the mood shifted from excitement to confusion and then to horror. "Who's that guy?" Chloe asked, her brow furrowed as she stared at the screen. John's heart sank. It was unmistakable. Andrea was sitting with Ethan, holding his hand. The laughter, the casual touches, everything about the scene screamed intimacy. The moment the waiter delivered the necklace, Andrea's eyes lit up. "Look what John sent me," she exclaimed, her voice brimming with excitement. But it wasn't directed at her husband. It was aimed at Ethan. John's face turned pale as he watched the young man lean in, helping Andrea fasten the necklace around her neck. "Your husband is such a romantic," Ethan teased. his fingers brushing against her skin in a way that made John's stomach churn. "He's not bad," Andrea replied, a coy smile playing on her lips. "But let's see if you can outdo him tonight." Chloe, sensing the tension in the room, looked up at her father, her voice trembling. "Dad, I think we should stop watching." John shook his head, unable to tear his eyes away from the screen. "No," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's see where this goes." The family watched in stunned silence as the night unfolded. Andrea and Ethan laughed, shared stories, and exchanged flirtatious glances, completely unaware that their conversation was being broadcast to the very people Andrea was deceiving. As the waiter returned with the check, Ethan leaned in close to Andrea and whispered something in her ear, making her giggle like a schoolgirl. "That's enough," John said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He fumbled with the remote, turning off the stream, plunging the room into an oppressive silence. Jenna was the first to speak. "Dad, what just happened?" John stood up slowly, his legs feeling like lead. "I need some time," he muttered, his voice hollow. Without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving his stunned family behind. Andrea, oblivious to the chaos she had caused back home, continued her evening with Ethan, laughing and enjoying herself. It wasn't until much later, when she finally checked her phone, that she realized something was horribly wrong. Her mother's furious messages, Chloe's tearful texts, and her sister's angry voicemails painted a bleak picture. Panicked, Andrea tried calling John, but he didn't answer. She called Chloe next, but her daughter sent her straight to voicemail. Frantically, Andrea dialed her mother. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. Her mother's response was ice cold. "You have some nerve, Andrea. I can't believe what I just saw. How could you do this to John? How could you do this to Chloe?" Andrea's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you talking about? What did you see?" Her mother let out a bitter laugh. "John invited us all to watch you open your anniversary gift at the restaurant. We saw everything. Everything, Andrea. You and that man. Ethan, is it?" Andrea's blood ran cold. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. How did this happen?" Her mother's voice was laced with disappointment. "I don't know what's worse, that you did this, or that you were careless enough to get caught. You need to talk to John, Andrea, and you need to fix this." Andrea felt the walls closing in around her. "Mom, I didn't mean for this to happen. Ethan doesn't mean anything to me. It was just, I don't even know. It was a mistake. Mistake or not, you've hurt your family, Andrea. John doesn't deserve this. Neither does Chloe." When the call ended, Andrea was left staring at her phone, tears welling up in her eyes. How could she have let things get so out of hand? And more importantly, how could she fix this mess she had created? She spent the rest of the night pacing around her house, replaying the events of the evening in her mind. Every laugh, every touch, every word exchanged with Ethan felt like a dagger in her chest now. What had once seemed thrilling and exciting now felt dirty and wrong. The next morning, Andrea tried calling John again, but he still didn't answer. She sent him a text instead, begging him to come home so they could talk. "I'm so sorry," she wrote. "Please, just come home. We need to talk." But there was no response. Days passed, and still, John remained silent. He had moved out, taking a few belongings with him and leaving the rest behind. Chloe, too, had become distant, spending most of her time with friends or locked away in her room. The once warm and lively home felt cold and empty, and Andrea was drowning in the silence. One afternoon, she finally broke down and drove to the lake house where John had been staying. She found him sitting on the porch, a beer in his hand, staring out at the water. "John," she called softly as she approached him. He didn't look up. "I don't want to talk right now," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Please," Andrea begged, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I love you, John. I love our family. I don't want to lose you." John took a deep breath, still not looking at her. "You didn't just hurt me, Andrea. You broke me. You broke our family. How do I trust you after this? How do I look at you the same way again?" Andrea sank to her knees beside him, clutching his hand. I'll do anything, John. Anything to make this right. Please, just give me a chance. John finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with pain. I don't know if I can, Andrea. I really don't. That night, Andrea drove home alone, her heart heavy with despair. She knew that the road to forgiveness would be long, and she wasn't even sure if John would ever be able to forgive her. But one thing was clear. She would do whatever it took to try and fix the damage she had caused. Because losing John and Chloe was not an option she was willing to accept. As Andrea drove away from the lake house, her mind spiraled in turmoil. John's words echoed in her head. I don't know if I can, Andrea. I really don't. He hadn't slammed the door shut, but it felt like the lock was already turning. The weight of her actions pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She had always believed that love could conquer any mistake, that she could charm her way out of difficult situations. But this was different. The road blurred as she navigated back home, her vision clouded by tears she couldn't hold back any longer. The betrayal she had committed wasn't just against John, but also Chloe and the very foundation of the family they had built. Ethan, once a thrilling escape, now felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. When Andrea arrived home, the house felt more like a museum than a place of warmth and laughter. Everything was still there. The pictures of Chloe as a toddler, the framed photo of their honeymoon in Hawaii, the small, sentimental trinkets from anniversaries past. But the life behind those moments seemed to have vanished. She noticed John's toothbrush still in the holder in their bathroom, his favorite mug still in the kitchen cabinet. His scent lingered in the air, but the man himself was gone. She sank onto the living room couch, holding her head in her hands. How had she let things unravel this far? And could she ever truly undo what had been done? Meanwhile, at the lake house, John stood on the small porch, looking out over the water. The view was usually calming for him, a refuge from the pressures of work and life. But today it was nothing more than a reminder of what he had lost. His heart ached with every beat, a dull, constant throb of pain he couldn't shake. He had loved Andrea with everything he had. She had been his world. He'd sacrificed, compromised, and built a life for them. A life he thought they both cherished. But that night at the restaurant, when he watched her with Ethan, laughing, flirting, sharing intimate moments meant only for them, he had felt something break inside of him. It wasn't just the affair. It was the betrayal of trust. It was the thought that Andrea had given a part of herself, something that should have been his alone, to another man. And now, every memory they had shared, every kiss, every late-night conversation, every whispered, I love you, felt tainted. John had always believed in working things out, in fighting for his marriage. But this? He didn't know if there was anything left to fight for. Days passed, and the tension between Andrea and Chloe grew thicker. Chloe hadn't said much since that night, but the distance between mother and daughter was palpable. Andrea knew she needed to talk to Chloe, but every time she tried to approach her, she was met with cold indifference or an excuse to avoid the conversation. One evening, as Chloe sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, Andrea mustered the courage to try again. Chloe, can we talk? She asked softly, taking a seat across from her. Chloe didn't look up. About what? About everything. I know I've hurt you. I know I've hurt your dad, and I just want to try and make things right. Chloe set her phone down and finally looked at her mother, her eyes filled with anger and hurt. How could you, Mom? How could you do this to Dad? To us? Andrea's heart clenched. I made a terrible mistake. I was stupid, Chloe. I wasn't thinking about what I could lose. I didn't realize what I had until you got caught? Chloe interrupted, her voice sharp. Because that's what it feels like. You didn't care about what you were doing until everyone saw. Now you want to fix it, but it's too late. Andrea's tears welled up again. Chloe, I love you and your dad. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, Chloe shouted, standing up from the table. You hurt him, and you hurt me. You made Dad cry, Mom. I've never seen him like that before. Andrea swallowed the lump in her throat. I know, sweetheart. I know, and I regret it every single day. Regret isn't enough, Chloe shot back. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you for this. With that, Chloe stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Andrea sitting there, feeling more alone than ever. At the lake house, John was doing his best to move forward, but every day felt like a battle. He threw himself into work, taking on extra projects and keeping himself as busy as possible to avoid the nagging thoughts of Andrea and what they had shared. He didn't speak to her except through brief, cold texts about practical matters like bills or Chloe's schedule. And even though his mind told him it was over, his heart couldn't help but remember the good times. The times when he and Andrea had been happy, when they had built a life together filled with laughter, love, and dreams. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling day at work, John found himself staring at his phone, Andrea's name in his recent call log. He hadn't spoken to her since that night at the lake house, but part of him was aching for closure, or maybe just to hear her voice one last time. He tapped her name and listened as the phone rang. John? Andrea's voice was soft, tentative. John didn't speak at first. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, but the silence between them felt unbearable. I don't know what to do anymore, he finally admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I'm sorry, Andrea whispered, her own voice breaking. I'm so sorry, John. I know, he replied, but sorry doesn't fix this. There was a long pause, and then Andrea asked, can we just talk? Please. Not about the affair, but about us. About Chloe. About everything. John hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that conversation, but a part of him knew they needed to talk if they were ever going to move forward, whether together or apart. Okay, he agreed after a moment. We'll talk. When John arrived at the house later that evening, the tension between him and Andrea was palpable. They sat in the living room, the distance between them feeling like a chasm that neither knew how to cross. Andrea was the first to speak. I know I've hurt you in ways that I can't take back, and I know that you might never be able to forgive me, but I need you to know that I love you, John. I've always loved you. John stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then why, Andrea? Why did you do it? Andrea took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't know. I wish I could give you a better answer, but I don't know. Maybe it was the excitement, the feeling of being desired by someone new. Maybe I was just selfish, but it never meant I didn't love you. John's jaw clenched. That's the thing, Andrea. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done it. Andrea wiped at her tears. I know, and I'm so sorry. I wish I could undo it. I wish I could go back and make different choices. John shook his head. But you can't. And now I don't know if we can come back from this. They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity before Andrea spoke again. What about Chloe? John sighed, leaning back in his chair. She's hurting too. She doesn't know how to deal with this any more than I do. I want to fix things with her, Andrea said softly. I don't want her to hate me. She doesn't hate you, John replied, though his voice lacked conviction. But she's hurt, and she's looking to me to protect her. Andrea nodded, understanding. I don't want to put her in the middle of this. John ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his features. I don't either. But we have to figure out how to move forward, for her sake. And for us? Andrea asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John didn't answer right away. His eyes were filled with conflict, a mixture of pain, love, and anger. I don't know, Andrea. I really don't. Weeks passed, and though the tension between John and Andrea remained, they both made an effort to keep things as normal as possible for Chloe's sake. They attended her school events together, though they kept their interactions polite and distant. Andrea had taken up a new hobby, volunteering at a local charity in an effort to keep herself busy and distracted. But no matter how many hours she spent helping others, the emptiness inside her remained. Chloe, meanwhile, had started seeing a counselor at John's suggestion, hoping to help her process the complex emotions she was dealing with. The sessions were helpful, though Chloe remained guarded around her mother, still unable to fully trust her again. One afternoon, while Andrea was sitting at the charity's office, sorting through paperwork, her phone buzzed with a message from John. Can we meet tonight? I think we need to talk about what's next. Andrea's heart raced as she read the message. Was this the conversation she had been dreading? Or was it the one she had been hoping for? She wasn't sure, but she knew she had to face it, whatever the outcome. Of course, she replied. Where? That evening, Andrea sat nervously at the small cafe where she and John had agreed to meet. She hadn't seen him in a few days, and the anticipation of what he might say was eating away at her. When John finally walked in, he looked tired, but determined. They exchanged brief pleasantries before getting to the heart of the matter. I've been thinking a lot, John began, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. About us. About everything. Andrea held her breath, waiting for him to continue. I'm not going to lie to you, Andrea. What you did hurt me in ways I didn't think were possible, and I don't know if I can ever fully get past it. Andrea nodded, tears already welling up in her eyes. But, John continued, his voice softer now, I also know that we have a lot of history, and we have Chloe, and as much as I want to walk away, a part of me still loves you. Andrea's heart skipped a beat. John, He held up a hand, stopping her. I'm not saying everything will go back to the way it was. I don't know if it ever can, but I'm willing to try. For Chloe, and maybe for us. Andrea's tears spilled over as she reached across the table to take his hand. I'll do anything, John. I'll do whatever it takes. John looked at her, his eyes filled with both hope and sadness. We'll take it slow, one day at a time. But if you betray me again, Andrea, that's it. I can't go through this again. I won't, Andrea promised, her voice trembling. I swear, I won't. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Andrea allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The cafe's soft lights flickered overhead, casting a warm glow on Andrea's tear-streaked face as she gripped John's hand. His words, although cautious, gave her a glimmer of hope she hadn't dared to feel for weeks. One day at a time, he had said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. John, still wary, withdrew his hand after a moment, the silence between them heavy with the weight of their shared history and unresolved pain. Neither knew exactly how to move forward, but both recognized the need to try. If only for the sake of Chloe, the one unbreakable bond that still tied them together. As they left the cafe, Andrea hesitated by the door. John, she said softly, her voice trembling, I just want you to know, whatever happens, I'm committed to making this right. I'll do whatever it takes. John glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. We'll see, he replied quietly, before turning to walk out into the chilly evening air. The weeks that followed were difficult. Andrea and John were careful around each other, maintaining a fragile peace for Chloe's sake. At home, things were tense. Chloe had grown more distant, throwing herself into school and her friends, and avoiding any meaningful conversation with either of her parents. Every shared meal felt awkward, a far cry from the lively family dinners they used to enjoy. But despite the tension, Andrea was grateful for even the smallest signs of progress. John had moved some of his things back into the house, though he still spent nights at the lake house more often than not. They weren't sleeping in the same room. Andrea knew that was too much to expect right now, but the fact that he hadn't left completely gave her hope. He hadn't filed for divorce. He hadn't cut her out of his life. Small steps, she reminded herself. One day at a time. One evening, as Andrea prepared dinner alone in the kitchen, Chloe came in, grabbed a drink from the fridge, and lingered for a moment, watching her mother silently. Andrea noticed and tried to seize the opportunity for a conversation. Chloe, do you want to help me with dinner? She asked, forcing her voice to remain calm and light. Chloe shrugged. I guess, she muttered, walking over to the counter. Andrea handed her a cutting board and some vegetables to chop. As they worked side by side, the silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken feelings. Chloe, Andrea began cautiously, I know things have been really hard lately, and I just want you to know that I'm really sorry for everything. I love you and your dad more than anything, and I hate that I hurt both of you. Chloe didn't respond immediately, focusing on her chopping. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, her words measured. I don't understand why you did it, Mom. Why did you have to cheat on Dad? He didn't deserve that. Andrea's heart clenched at the pain in her daughter's voice. I don't have a good answer, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking about how it would affect you or your dad. I was selfish. Yeah, you were, Chloe replied, her tone sharp. Andrea flinched but nodded. You're right. I was. And I can't change what I did, but I want to do everything I can to make things better. I don't want to lose you or your dad. Chloe paused, setting the knife down and looking at her mother for the first time in what felt like forever. I don't want to lose us either, she said, her voice softer now, but it's going to take time. Andrea nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know, and I'll be here, however long it takes. Chloe gave a small nod, then picked up the knife again, resuming her chopping. It wasn't much, but it was something. Andrea knew they were far from healed, but at least they were talking again, and that was more than she could have hoped for just a few weeks ago. As the months passed, the Johnson family slowly began to rebuild. John had started spending more time at home, though he still retreated to the lake house on the weekends. Andrea had taken up therapy, both on her own and with John, as they tried to work through the complex web of emotions her affair had created. Chloe had continued her counseling, and though she was still guarded, she seemed more at ease, more willing to engage with her parents. Despite the progress, there were still moments of tension, moments when John would retreat into himself, the hurt too fresh to be soothed. Andrea, in turn, would give him space, knowing that pushing too hard could undo the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. One Friday evening, John came home early, surprising Andrea and Chloe. It had been a long week, and both women were lounging in the living room, watching TV. The sound of the front door opening made them both turn. Hey, John greeted them, his voice warm but reserved. Chloe jumped up from the couch, rushing to hug him. Dad, you're home early. John smiled as he hugged her back, glancing over at Andrea. Yeah, I thought I'd spend the evening with you too, if that's okay. Andrea smiled tentatively. Of course it is. I'm glad you're here. They spent the evening watching movies and eating takeout, and for the first time in a long while, the atmosphere in the house felt almost normal. Andrea couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were on their way to healing. But as the night wore on and Chloe eventually went to bed, the reality of their situation set back in. John and Andrea sat in the living room, the silence between them heavy but not hostile. I've been thinking, John said suddenly, breaking the silence, about us, about where we go from here. Andrea's heart skipped a beat. And? She asked, her voice cautious. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if things will ever be the same, Andrea, but I think we're making progress. We're talking more, spending time together. That's a start. Andrea nodded. I agree. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, but I'm willing to keep working at it. I love you, John. I love our family. John looked at her, his expression conflicted. I know you do, but sometimes I wonder if love is enough. Andrea's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? I mean, John said, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, that trust is just as important as love. And right now, I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again. Andrea's heart sank. I understand, she whispered, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust, John. I know I broke it, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back. John stared at the floor, his thoughts a swirling mess. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust her again. But every time he looked at her, he couldn't shake the image of her with Ethan, laughing, flirting, sharing moments that should have been his. I don't know how to move past it, John admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Every time I try, it's like this wall goes up and I can't get through it. I don't want to resent you, but sometimes I do. Andrea reached out, placing a hand on his arm. I know, and I don't blame you. I'll give you all the time you need. John sighed again, glancing at her hand on his arm before pulling away gently. It's not about time, Andrea. It's about whether or not I can forgive you. Truly forgive you. Andrea swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. And can you? John didn't answer right away. He stood up, walking to the window and staring out into the dark night. I don't know, he finally said, his voice quiet. I just don't know. The following weekend, John retreated to the lake house again, leaving Andrea and Chloe alone. Andrea understood his need for space, but it still hurt to see him pull away. She spent the weekend keeping herself busy, working on projects around the house and volunteering at the charity. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety that had settled in her chest. On Sunday afternoon, while Chloe was out with friends, Andrea decided to take a drive to the lake house. She hadn't been there since John had moved some of his things back to the family home, and part of her was curious to see if anything had changed. As she drove through the winding roads leading to the house, memories flooded her mind. The lake house had always been a place of peace for their family, a refuge from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. They had spent countless weekends there, fishing, hiking, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was where they had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and even their 10th wedding anniversary. The thought that it had now become John's sanctuary, a place where he went to escape from her, was a painful one. When Andrea arrived, she saw John's truck parked in the driveway, but there was no sign of him outside. She hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. John answered after a few moments, surprised to see her. "Andrea, what are you doing here?" I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice unsure. "If that's okay." John stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The house was much the same as she remembered, though there were a few more personal touches. John's favorite book stacked on the coffee table, his guitar propped up in the corner. It was clear that he had made the space his own. They sat down in the living room, the silence between them thick with tension. "What do you want to talk about?" John asked, his tone neutral. Andrea took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry for everything. For the affair, for the lies, for hurting you and Chloe. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I need you to know that I'll never stop trying to make it right." John looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I know you're sorry, Andrea, but sorry doesn't undo what happened." "I know," she replied quickly, "but I love you, John, and I love our family. I don't want to lose that." John sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't want to lose it either, but I can't just pretend like nothing happened." "I'm not asking you to," Andrea said softly. "I'm asking you to give us a chance, to see if we can rebuild what we had. It won't be easy, and I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to put in the work." John was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't know if we can ever get back to where we were, Andrea. I don't even know if that's what I want anymore." Andrea's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" John rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion evident in his features. "I mean that maybe we've outgrown each other. Maybe this is a sign that we're not meant to be together anymore." Andrea felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. "John, no. Don't say that. We can make this work." "I know we can." John shook his head. "I don't know, Andrea. Maybe it's time we both moved on." Andrea's tears spilled over as she shook her head in disbelief. "No. Please, John. Don't give up on us. We've been through so much together. We can get through this too." John stood up, pacing the room. "I'm not giving up. I'm just being realistic. What if this is the end of the road for us?" Andrea stood up too, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "It doesn't have to be. We can still fix this. We can still fight for our family." John looked at her, his eyes filled with sadness. "I don't know if I have any fight left in me, Andrea." Andrea reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Then let me fight for us. Please." John stared at their intertwined hands for a moment before gently pulling away. "I need time to think," he said, his voice quiet. Andrea nodded, her heart breaking. "Okay, take all the time you need." As she left the lake house, Andrea couldn't shake the feeling that John was slipping further away from her. She had hoped that they were finally turning a corner, that they were starting to heal. But now, she wasn't so sure. The next few weeks were a blur of tension and uncertainty. John and Andrea continued to navigate their delicate arrangement, but it was clear that something had shifted between them. John was more distant than ever, spending more time at the lake house and less time at home. Chloe, sensing the strain between her parents, grew quieter, retreating into herself. Andrea tried to stay hopeful, but the growing distance between her and John gnawed at her. She had spent so long trying to repair the damage she had caused, but now it felt like her efforts were in vain. Every time she thought they were making progress, John would pull away again, leaving her feeling more alone than ever. One evening, after another tense family dinner, Andrea retreated to her bedroom, feeling the weight of her emotions pressing down on her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside her where John used to sleep. Tears filled her eyes as she thought about everything they had been through. The good times, the bad times, the moments of love and laughter. How had it all gone so wrong? How had she let things fall apart so completely? As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, her phone buzzed with a message. She picked it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw it was from John. "Can we talk tomorrow? I think we need to make some decisions." Andrea's stomach dropped as she read the message. She knew what that meant. The conversation they had been avoiding for months was finally coming. The conversation about whether or not their marriage had a future. Her hands shook as she typed out a reply. "Okay, let me know when and where." As she hit send, a sense of dread settled over her. Tomorrow could very well be the end of everything she had fought so hard to save. The following day, Andrea and John met at a quiet park near their home. The weather was cool, the sky overcast, matching the somber mood that hung between them. They sat on a bench, the sounds of children playing in the distance a stark contrast to the tension between them. John was the first to speak. "I've been thinking a lot, Andrea. About us, about our family, about what's best for everyone." Andrea nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She braced herself for what was coming next. "I don't think we can keep doing this," John said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't think we can keep pretending like everything's going to be okay." Andrea's breath caught in her throat. "John, please." John held up a hand, stopping her. "I know you want to keep fighting for us, and I respect that. But I've realized something. I don't think I can ever truly forgive you for what happened. And without forgiveness, without trust, we can't rebuild what we had." Andrea's tears spilled over, her heart breaking. "But I love you, John. I love you so much." "I know you do," John said softly. "But sometimes, love isn't enough." Andrea shook her head, sobs racking her body. "I can't lose you. I can't lose our family." John reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not losing our family, Andrea. We'll always be a family for Chloe's sake. But as a couple, I think it's time we let go." Andrea cried. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. "I'm sorry," John whispered, his own eyes filled with tears. "I wish things could have been different." Andrea nodded, unable to speak through her tears. They sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, both grieving the end of their marriage, the end of the life they had built together. When they finally stood up to leave, Andrea turned to John, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll always love you." John nodded, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'll always love you too." And with that, they parted ways, both knowing that their journey together had come to an end. The park where Andrea and John had shared their final conversation was now silent in her mind, as though the echoes of their past had faded with the sun setting behind the clouds that day. The finality of John's words still reverberated through her, even though weeks had passed. Sometimes, love isn't enough. Those words, as painful as they had been to hear, were the undeniable truth she had feared for so long. Andrea now faced the reality she had tried so hard to avoid. Her marriage to John was over. The future they had once envisioned together was gone, shattered by the choices she had made and the pain she had caused. She was no longer the wife to the man she had shared so many years with, the mother to a child in a happy home, but someone trying to pick up the pieces of a broken life and find a way forward. After their conversation in the park, Andrea had returned to an empty house, empty in every sense of the word. John had begun the process of officially moving out, taking more of his belongings back to the lake house and leaving the home they had shared with only memories behind. Chloe had spent more time at friends' houses and with John, trying to distance herself from the turmoil that had engulfed their lives. Andrea couldn't blame her. She had caused this distance, and Chloe, still struggling with her own emotions, wasn't ready to forgive or forget. For days, Andrea had wandered through the house like a ghost, unsure of what to do next. She would pick up a photograph of the three of them from a family vacation and stare at it until her eyes blurred with tears. She would move through the kitchen where they had shared countless meals, the silence almost unbearable. The laughter, the love, the warmth, all of it had disappeared. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift within her. Andrea knew that she couldn't continue like this, living in a state of paralysis, consumed by guilt and sorrow. She had to find a way to rebuild her life, to become someone that Chloe could look up to again, even if John had chosen to move on. And so, Andrea decided to start taking small steps toward healing. The first step was reconnecting with Chloe. Their relationship had been strained ever since the affair had come to light. And though Chloe had never openly expressed hatred toward her mother, her withdrawal and emotional distance had been undeniable. Chloe's once bubbly personality had been replaced by silence and short, clipped answers. Andrea feared that the damage done to their relationship might be irreparable. One Saturday morning, Andrea decided to take a bold step. She knocked on Chloe's bedroom door and waited. "Yeah." Chloe's voice came through, muffled by the door. Andrea hesitated for a moment before opening the door slightly. "Can I come in?" Chloe was sitting on her bed, headphones on, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up at her mother, her expression neutral. "I guess." Andrea stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, nervously twisting her hands in her lap. "Chloe, I know things have been really hard between us lately. I know I've hurt you, and I've hurt your dad, and I just want to say again how sorry I am." Chloe didn't respond immediately. She took her headphones off and placed them beside her, then turned her attention fully to Andrea. "I know you're sorry, Mom. You've said it a bunch of times. But that doesn't really change what happened." Andrea nodded, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I know, and I don't expect it to. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better, to be someone you can trust again. I love you, Chloe. You're the most important person in my life, and I don't want to lose you." Chloe's gaze softened slightly, though her walls were still up. "It's just hard. Everything's different now. Dad's different. You're different. I don't know how to feel about anything anymore." Andrea's heart ached at the vulnerability in her daughter's voice. "I understand," she said softly, "and I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. But I want you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready to talk. About anything. I'll be patient." Chloe looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. It's going to take time." "I know," Andrea whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Take all the time you need." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with the tentative beginnings of understanding, a fragile peace between mother and daughter. As Andrea stood up to leave, Chloe finally spoke again. "Maybe we can do something together later. Just the two of us. If you're not busy." Andrea's heart swelled with hope. "I'd love that," she replied, smiling softly. "Anything you want." Chloe nodded, offering her mother a small, tentative smile in return. It was the first genuine connection they had shared in what felt like forever, and though it was just a small step, Andrea knew it was a step in the right direction. The next step was addressing the practicalities of her new life. John had officially filed for divorce, and though the proceedings were amicable, they were painful all the same. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split between them. John had offered to let Andrea stay in the house until it sold, but Andrea wasn't sure she could bear to live there any longer. Every room held memories of their life together, and each one was like a stab to the heart. Andrea began looking for an apartment in the city, something small and manageable for her and Chloe. She knew that it would be an adjustment for both of them, but it was necessary. Holding onto the house felt like holding onto the past, and she needed to start looking toward the future, even if it was uncertain. One afternoon, after a long day of apartment hunting, Andrea received a call from her lawyer. The divorce papers were ready to be signed. Andrea stared at the phone for a long moment after the call ended. She knew this day was coming, but the finality of it felt like a blow she wasn't prepared for. Signing the papers would mean that her marriage to John, the man she had loved for over 2 decades, was truly over. Later that week, Andrea sat in her lawyer's office, the divorce papers spread out in front of her. She felt numb as she picked up the pen, her hand shaking slightly as she signed her name on the dotted line. It was done. Her marriage was officially over. As Andrea left the office and stepped out into the cool autumn air, she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The weight of the moment was overwhelming, but she knew that she had to keep moving forward. For Chloe, for herself. In the months that followed, Andrea focused on rebuilding her life. She and Chloe moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't the spacious home they had once shared, but it was cozy and comfortable, a place where they could start fresh. Chloe had adjusted surprisingly well to the move. Though she still spent a lot of time with John, she and Andrea had begun to rebuild their relationship, slowly but surely. They started having movie nights together, going out for lunch on weekends, and even talking more openly about their feelings. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was all Andrea could hope for. Andrea also threw herself into her work at the charity, finding solace in helping others. The organization, which focused on providing support to families in need, had become a second home for her. She spent long hours organizing events, coordinating volunteers, and raising funds. It gave her a sense of purpose, a way to channel her energy into something positive. And yet, despite all her efforts to move forward, there were still moments when the pain of losing John felt unbearable. She would catch herself thinking about him at the most unexpected times, while grocery shopping, while watching a movie, even while sitting alone in her apartment. The ache of missing him never truly went away. John had become a distant presence in her life, though they remained cordial for Chloe's sake. They exchanged brief messages about Chloe's schedule and occasionally saw each other at her school events, but their interactions were polite and impersonal. One afternoon, Andrea found herself sitting alone on a park bench, much like the one where she and John had shared their final conversation months ago. She watched as families strolled by, children laughing and playing, couples holding hands as they walked together. It was a stark reminder of what she had lost, what she had thrown away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from John. "Hey, Chloe wants to spend the weekend at the lake house. I'll pick her up around 6. Is that okay?" Andrea stared at the message for a moment, her heart sinking slightly. Chloe spent more and more time with John at the lake house, and though Andrea understood why, it still hurt. She quickly typed out a response. "That's fine. I'll make sure she's ready." As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, Andrea let out a deep sigh. The loneliness she felt in moments like this was suffocating. She had thought that by now, she would have adjusted to her new life, but some days were harder than others. Later that evening, John arrived to pick up Chloe. Andrea stood by the door, watching as he helped Chloe carry her overnight bag to the car. They exchanged polite small talk, but the distance between them was palpable. Once Chloe was safely in the car, John turned to Andrea. "How's everything going?" Andrea forced a smile. "It's going okay. We're settling in." John nodded, his hands in his pockets. "That's good." There was a long, awkward silence before John finally spoke again. "I'm glad we're able to keep things civil. For Chloe's sake." Andrea's smile faltered. "Me too." John hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but he simply nodded and turned to leave. As Andrea watched him drive away, a wave of sadness washed over her. She missed him, missed the easy conversations they used to have, the shared moments of laughter and love. But she knew that those days were gone, and there was no going back. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, Andrea began to find her footing again. The pain of the divorce still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. She had built a new life for herself, and though it wasn't the life she had once envisioned, it was a life she could be proud of. Chloe had started to open up more as well. They still had their ups and downs, but the walls that had once separated them were beginning to crumble. Andrea cherished every moment they spent together, knowing that their relationship was stronger now because of the challenges they had faced. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Chloe turned to her mother. "Mom, are you happy?" Andrea was caught off guard by the question. She thought for a moment before answering. "I think I'm getting there." Chloe nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I think I'm getting there too." They shared a quiet smile, And for the first time in a long while, Andrea felt a sense of peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that whatever happened, she and Chloe would face it together. Months after the divorce was finalized, Andrea received an unexpected call. It was from John. "Hey," he began, his voice uncertain. "I've been thinking a lot lately, and I was wondering if you'd be open to meeting for coffee sometime. Just to talk." Andrea was taken aback by the request. They hadn't spoken outside of conversations about Chloe in months, and she wasn't sure what to make of John's sudden interest in meeting up. "Sure," she replied cautiously. "I'd be open to that." They agreed to meet the following week at a small cafe near the lake. As Andrea arrived at the cafe, she felt a mixture of nerves and curiosity. What did John want to talk about? Was he reaching out in an attempt to reconcile, or was this simply a conversation for closure? When she saw John sitting at a table near the window, she felt a pang of familiarity. He looked much the same as he always had, but there was a new sense of calm about him, an ease she hadn't seen in a long time. "Hey," Andrea greeted him as she approached the table. John stood up, offering a small smile. "Hey, it's good to see you." They sat down, and after ordering their drinks, there was a moment of silence as they both tried to find the right words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," John began, his eyes focused on the coffee in front of him, "about everything that's happened, about us. And I realized I never really gave myself the chance to fully process it all." Andrea listened quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. "When everything happened with the affair, I was so hurt and angry that I didn't take the time to really understand what was going on with me," John continued. "I just shut down and tried to move on without really dealing with the pain." Andrea nodded, her throat tight. "I know I hurt you, John, and I'm so sorry for everything." John looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I know you are, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about how we got here. It wasn't just the affair, Andrea. We both played a part in what happened to our marriage. I wasn't always there for you the way I should have been. I took you for granted, and I didn't realize how much you were struggling." Andrea blinked back tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, John. I was just lost." John reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I know, and I've forgiven you." Andrea's breath caught in her throat. "You have?" John nodded. "Yeah. It took me a while, but I've realized that holding on to the anger wasn't helping anyone. It was only hurting me, and it was hurting Chloe too. I needed to let it go." Andrea felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. John smiled softly. "We've both been through a lot, and I think it's time we put the past behind us. For Chloe's sake, and for our own." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. "I don't know what the future holds for us," John said after a while, "but I want us to be okay, whatever that looks like." Andrea nodded, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I want that too." They sat together for a long time, talking about their past, their mistakes, and the lessons they had learned. It wasn't a conversation about reconciliation, but rather one of healing and understanding. By the time they left the cafe, Andrea felt lighter than she had in months. She knew that their marriage was over, but in that moment, she realized that their story wasn't defined by its end. It was defined by the love they had shared, the family they had built, and the strength they had found in moving forward. As she walked away from the cafe, Andrea allowed herself a small smile. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. And that, she realized, was enough. As the months rolled by, Andrea found herself reflecting more often on the strange journey she had been on. The rise and fall of her marriage, her mistakes, and the slow, difficult climb toward redemption. Though her heart had been shattered, she had discovered an unexpected resilience within herself. What she once thought of as the end of her life had become the beginning of something new. The conversation with John at the cafe had been a turning point. It didn't erase the hurt or magically restore what had been lost, but it allowed them to move forward, separately, but with a sense of peace. They weren't angry anymore, not at each other, not at the world. And that, in itself, was a profound relief. For Chloe's sake, Andrea and John maintained a cordial relationship. Chloe had been at the center of their lives for so long, and she remained their mutual anchor. As her high school graduation approached, both parents threw themselves into making sure the moment was as special as possible. In the months leading up to graduation, Andrea and Chloe had grown closer, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of healing. Chloe, now more mature and thoughtful, had come to understand that her parents were fallible human beings, capable of mistakes. Though she hadn't forgotten the hurt caused by the affair, she had seen the effort her mother had made to atone for it. Chloe wasn't a little girl anymore, and Andrea admired the young woman she was becoming. The apartment Andrea and Chloe shared had become more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of their new life, modest, but full of warmth and hope. The walls were covered in photographs of the two of them, smiling at various milestones over the past few years. It wasn't the same as the life they had in their old house with John, but it was a life they had built together, a place where they could laugh, cry, and grow. One evening, Chloe came home from school with her acceptance letter to a prestigious university. It was the moment Andrea had been both dreading and anticipating. Her daughter was going to leave for college. It was bittersweet. She was so proud of Chloe, but the thought of her leaving left Andrea with a hollow feeling. For the last few years, Chloe had been her constant companion, and Andrea had poured everything into rebuilding their relationship. They had celebrated that night with John at dinner, the three of them sharing proud smiles over Chloe's accomplishment. It was one of those rare evenings that felt, in a strange way, like old times. There was a sense of ease and pride between them as they focused on their daughter's future. "Are you nervous about leaving?" Andrea asked Chloe over dessert. Chloe shrugged. "A little, but I'm mostly excited. It's a new chapter, right? I've got a lot to look forward to." Andrea smiled, trying to hide the pang of loss she felt. "Yes, you do. And you'll do great. I know it." John nodded in agreement. "You've got a whole world ahead of you, Chloe. Just remember, we're always here for you, no matter what." Chloe beamed at them, her eyes shining with excitement for the future. "Thanks, guys. I couldn't have done it without you." As the day of Chloe's graduation approached, Andrea found herself reflecting on how far they had all come. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had faded into the background, replaced by a cautious optimism for what lay ahead. On the day of the ceremony, Andrea watched with tears in her eyes as Chloe walked across the stage in her cap and gown. Sitting in the stands next to John, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for their daughter. Chloe had weathered the storm of their divorce, had grown into a remarkable young woman, and now she was moving on to the next stage of her life.